welcome to my live teaching learning session of BECC 131 Microeconomics. We have discussed in previous sessions topic of scarcity and choice and theory of demand, elasticity of demand, theory of supply and elasticity of supply. Now today we will discuss about utility analysis, in which we will study cardinal utility analysis. And some applications of demand and supply we will discuss in today's session. This is in block 2, unit 5. Cardinal utility analysis. This is the theory of utility which is given by Dr. Alfred Marshall. Utility is basically of two types. First of all, you must have to understand what is the meaning of utility and how many types of utility we can examine, we can explain. Number one is utility refers to the quantity of a commodity which gives us satisfaction, or utility means want satisfying power. In simple words, when we consume any commodity, then we get satisfaction. And this satisfaction, if it can be measurable in terms of money, that is called cardinal utility. According to Marshall, utility is a cardinal concept in which utility can be measured in terms of money or in accurate numbers. But according to J.R. Hicks and R.G.D. Allen, utility is a ordinal concept. Ordinal means we can't measure utility in terms of money. We can give only ranks according to our preferences. It means utility is an internal feeling you can't express in words or in accurate numbers or exact. You can't measure in terms of money. J.R. Hicks said that utility is an ordinal concept in which you can give only ranks according to your preferences. If you are giving more preference, then give higher rank. If the commodity will give you less satisfaction, you can give lower rank. It means you can give only ranks according to your satisfaction, but you can't measure it in terms of money or in accurate numbers. So there are two concepts of utility. One is cardinal, other is ordinal. Cardinal means in which utility can be measurable in terms of money. This concept is given by Dr. Marshall. For example, pizza gives me more satisfaction as I get 60 utils after eating it in comparison to burger, which gives me 40 utils. Here we are using this word utils. What is the meaning of this utils? Utils is the measuring unit of utility. For example, we know that each and every commodity can be measured in terms of any particular unit. For example, milk can be measured in terms of liter. Cloth can be measured in terms of meter. Distance can be measured in terms of kilometer. Weight can be measured in terms of kilogram. So each and everything can be estimated and we can give accurate units to that thing. Same as utility, which gives us satisfaction. Utility is a want satisfying power. So utility can be measured in terms of utils. Utils is the measuring unit of utility. So if pizza is giving me 60 utils satisfaction and burger is giving me 40 utils satisfaction, so which one is higher? Pizza satisfaction is higher than burger satisfaction. So util is the imaginary unit by which we can measure utility. In case of ordinal utility, my first preference is pizza, which gives me more satisfaction than burger. Thus, my second preference is burger. It means here we can't measure utility in terms of money or in accurate numbers, we can give only ranks according to our preferences. For example, here rank is given that if you are giving more preference to pizza, then your preference will be you will give higher rank to pizza and lesser rank to burger. So, ordinal utility generally refers to that type of utility in which you can give only preferences, you can give only ranks according to your preferences. Like first preference is pizza and other preference is burger in case of this example. And in case of cardinal utility, you can measure it in accurate numbers like 60 utils giving you by pizza. If you are eating pizza, then you will get 60 util satisfaction. And if you eat burger, then you will get 40 util satisfaction. Here, satisfaction is measured in terms of utils or in accurate numbers like 60 and 40. So, cardinal utility explain that utility can be measured in terms of money or in accurate numbers. So this is the basic difference between the two types of utility. One is cardinal and other is ordinal. Now next is cardinal utility. What is the meaning of this cardinal utility and why we are studying here this cardinal utility approach? Generally, cardinal utility approach is related to consumer behavior. You know that we all are consumers and our main motive is to get maximum satisfaction through minimum spending. Being a rational consumer, our aim is to get maximum satisfaction through minimum spending or minimum expenditure. This approach of cardinal utility is studied under the theory of consumer behavior. How do consumer behave? Purchase less at higher price and purchase more at lower price. Generally, consumer will demand more for a commodity at lower price and less for a commodity at higher price. There is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Why do they behave like this? Why people demand more when price is lower? Why people demand less when price is higher? So cardinal utility theory attempts to find the answer to this question and with the help of which concept? Utility concept. In simple words, utility is the want satisfying power. Whatever commodity you are consuming, if that commodity is giving you satisfaction, it means that commodity has utility. Utility doesn't matter if that commodity is useful for you or harmful to you. Some person smokes cigarette. It means cigarette is giving them satisfaction. But we know that cigarette is injurious to health. But cigarette satisfying the smoker want or their satisfaction level. That's why utility doesn't matter, doesn't related with any harmful concept or useful concept if each and every commodity is giving you satisfaction and if any commodity is satisfying your want, it means that commodity has utility. Either it may be useful to you or harmful to you. It doesn't matter. So utility is generally only want satisfying power. For example, wants to consume apple, not banana. Therefore, he will consume only apple, not banana, because apple will give him maximum satisfaction. So, if your want is to consume apple, then apple will give you maximum satisfaction. And if you want to eat orange, then orange will give you maximum satisfaction. It means that orange has utility power. So, cardinal utility is a concept in which utility can be measured in terms of money or inaccurate numbers. And this concept was introduced by Dr. Marshall. Next is cardinal utility. Here we can explain all these things like what is cardinal utility, what are the assumptions behind this utility analysis theory, and what are the pros and cons of this utility approach. Now, first of all, utility in economics means the satisfaction that a consumer gets from commodity or any services. It means utility means the satisfaction or the power of satisfaction which a consumer can get after consuming that commodity or any taking goods and services. So, cardinal utility is that approach of utility in which customer can express his utility in terms of money or in terms of accurate numbers. Consumer can measure and express satisfaction in absolute values or in absolute terms. Utility can be measured in terms of utils. Utils is the unit of utility. One util means 1 unit of money. 2 utils means 2 unit of money. And this theory is also known as marginal analysis or new classical approach. Now, what are the assumptions of cardinal utility analysis? Number one is, here we are assuming that consumer is a rational person. Economics always studies about rational consumer. The person who is rational, who know how he can get maximum satisfaction through minimum spending, that person is called rational. So consumer act rationally to buy. Number one, this is the first assumption. Number two is consumer's income is limited to buying goods and services. Number one assumption is consumer are rationally to buy any type of goods and services which will give him higher satisfaction. Consumer will buy more, and which commodity will give him less satisfaction, consumer will buy less. It means consumer is rational. Consumer know about that power of utility, what he is getting through the satisfaction level or what he is getting from the consumption of that commodity. Next is consumer income. We assume that it is limited. Third is utility can be measurable. It means Marshall assumed that utility is measurable concept and utility can be measured in terms of money. And this approach depends on diminishing marginal utility. This diminishing marginal utility means DMU. D stands for diminishing, M means marginal, U means utility. This diminishing marginal utility law states that as well as you consume more and more units of a single commodity continuously, then your satisfaction which you derive from the consumption of that commodity start falling. That is called diminishing marginal utility. Next assumption is marginal utility of money doesn't change. It means marginal utility of money remains constant or fixed. It can't change. Next is utility is additive. Additive means we can add utility or satisfaction from the consumption of each and every unit of the commodity. Now, next is utility from one product depends on unit consumed. It is different from other product. It means utility is independent. One commodity will give you utility in a different aspect and other commodity will give you satisfaction in different aspect. So utility is independent from the nature of the commodity. So these are the assumptions of cardinal utility analysis. Now what are the pros and cons? Now pros is that utility aims to quantify utility. Here cardinal utility generally express utility in terms of money. We can quantify, we can measure it in terms of money. or in accurate numbers. Next is it analyzing the combinations of two commodities. If consumer is consuming two commodities, then we can get satisfaction from the consumption of these two commodities with the help of law of equimarginal utility. And next is better classification of commodities into substitute and complementary goods. You know that substitute goods are those goods which can use in place of each other, like tea or coffee. And complementary goods are those goods which always use together. For example, car and petrol, pen and refill, needle and thread. Now, next is explain the law of demand. We can explain the law of demand with the help of diminishing marginal utility. This is the benefit of this utility analysis approach. And it's very easy to know about preferences of the consumer. So, these are the pros of this cardinal utility approach. Now, what are the cons of this utility approach? It suffers from unrealistic assumptions because this cardinal utility approach, which is given by Marshall, it is based on some unrealistic assumptions. And what are the unrealistic assumptions? That marginal utility of money remains constant. You know that marginal utility of money can't remain constant. As well as money supply increases, the value of money falls. When money supply falls, value of money rises. It means value of money can change according to the change in supply of money. Then how can we assume that marginal utility of money remains constant? It is not possible. But here Marshall assumed that. Next is here, this assumption is that consumer income is limited. We assume that consumer income is constant or no change is possible. But you know that consumer income can be changed, either it may be increase or decrease. Next is Marshall assumed that utility can be measured in accurate numbers. But you know that if we consume any commodity, we get satisfaction. Then how can we estimate in accurate numbers? Is it possible? No, no way. Because utility is internal feeling. We get satisfaction from the consumption of any commodity. It's an internal feeling. We can't express in particular words or in accurate numbers. We can't measure it. We can't quantify it. So no accuracy, no accurate way to quantify satisfaction. Next is hard to assign absolute value to utility. Next is difficult to quantify utility to establish economic value, and different factors can impact decision of users. These are the cons of utility analysis theory, which is based on cardinal utility approach. Because cardinal utility approach assumed that consumer income is constant, marginal utility of money remains constant, utility is additive, and utility is measurable, and it depends on diminishing marginal utility. In these assumptions, here some assumptions are unrealistic. That's why we can criticize this approach. And again, this utility approach modified by J.R. Hicks and R.G.D. Allen, who gave ordinal utility approach, in which utility can be measured not in terms of money. We can give only ranks according to our preferences. Now, next is cardinal utility, which is presented by Alfred Marshall. According to this cardinal approach, utility can be measured. For example, an apple may yield to a consumer a utility or satisfaction of 20 utils, whereas an orange yields him a utility of 10 utils. So, which one is giving you maximum satisfaction? Obviously, 20 utils are more than 10 utils. Therefore, that the consumer gets twice as much utility from an apple as that from an orange. So here, utility, according to Alfred Marshall, it's a cardinal concept in which utility can be measured in terms of money or in accurate numbers. we can estimate it in utils, and utility can be measured in terms of accurate numbers or in utils. And consumer always want to get maximum satisfaction through minimum spending. So this is the cardinal utility approach. Now next is assumptions of cardinal utility analysis. Here some assumptions are given in detail. Number one is rationality. You know that consumer is a rational person. He seeks to maximize satisfaction from the limited income which is at his disposal. Next is utility is cardinal. We can quantify it, we can measure it in accurate numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. The utility is expressed in imaginary units or cardinal numbers tells us a great deal about the preferences of the consumer for a good. And utility is cardinally measurable in terms of utils. Next is marginal utility of money remains constant. Here we assume that marginal utility of money remains always constant. But we know that in reality it is not possible. Marginal utility of money can change according to the change in supply of money. Another important premise of cardinal utility of money is that money spent on the purchases of goods and services should remain constant. And next assumption is here always diminishing marginal utility law is applicable. It is also assumed that the marginal utility which we obtained after the consumption of a commodity, it diminishes continuously as its consumption increases. In other words, we can say that as well as we increase the number of units of a single commodity continuously, the satisfaction which we derive from the consumption of that commodity start falling. That is called law of diminishing marginal utility. So these are the assumptions of cardinal utility analysis. Next is here utility can be defined in terms of two types. One is total utility, other is marginal utility. What is total utility? Total utility is the total number of satisfaction which we derive from the consumption of that particular commodity. Total utility is the summation of satisfaction which is attained by the consumer from all the units of a commodity taken together in the consumption of a certain thing at a time. For example, in a day, if we drink 10 glass of water, in this, one glass of water will give us, for example, if one glass of water will give me 10 units satisfaction, other glass of water will give me 18 satisfaction, then again third glass of water will give me 21 satisfaction. If we add all these things, that is called total utility. So total utility is the summation of the satisfaction which we derive from the consumption of that particular thing or commodity. So we can add all these satisfaction and we can get total utility. In other words, we can say that total utility is the summation of marginal utility. Tu is equals to sigma mu. Sigma is summation and m is marginal, u is utility. So total utility is the summation of marginal utility. Now next is marginal utility. Marginal utility is the additional utility obtains from an additional unit of any commodity consumed or acquired. Marginal utility is the difference of total utility. It is the additional unit obtained from an additional unit of any commodity which is consumed or acquired. It is measured the difference between the utility of total units of stock of consumption of a given commodity and that of consuming one unit less in the stock considered. In symbolic terms, we can explain this marginal utility like mu is equals to tun minus TU and minus 1. Or we can calculate marginal utility in another terms like delta TU upon delta Q is equals to marginal utility. If change in total utility is divided by change in number of units, then we can get marginal utility. And if we take the difference between total utility TUX or TUN minus TUN minus 1, that is also the formula of marginal utility. So this is the definition of total and marginal utility. Now, what is the relationship between total utility and marginal utility? There is different types of relationship between total and marginal utility. Here, three relationship explained by Marshall. Number one is when total utility increases at diminishing rate, then marginal utility diminishes. It means when TU increases at diminishing rate, then MU will diminish. Next is when total utility is maximum or higher, then marginal utility will be zero. Third relation is when total utility start falling, then marginal utility will become negative. So there is a three relationship between total and marginal utility. One is when TU increases at diminishing rate, then MU also diminishes. When TU is maximum, MU will be zero. When TU start falling, MU will become negative. So we can say that MU can be zero, can be negative, but total utility can't be zero, can't be negative. Why? Because total utility is the total satisfaction which we derive from the consumption of that commodity. And obviously, if we are consuming any commodity and that commodity is giving us satisfaction, that's why we are consuming it. So if any commodity is giving us satisfaction, that it means the total utility we will definitely get after the consumption of that commodity. So total utility can't be zero. If number of units are zero, if we are not consuming any commodity, then total utility may be zero. Otherwise, total utility can't be zero, can't be negative. But MU can be zero, can be negative. Now, this relationship we can explain with the help of table and diagram also. For example, here utility schedule is given. Here in first column, units of apples are given and total utility and marginal utility is given. Units of apple, for example, we assume that here we are consuming 6 apples like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. 1 unit of apple will give us 10 satisfaction, total utility is 10. Uh, at second unit of apple, total utility is 18. And at 3 level units of apple, total utility is 22. Here, total utility is increasing, but at a diminishing rate. How we can say that it's a diminishing rate? In first unit, here total utility is 10. After that, 18. How much increase in total utility? 8 units. After that, 18 to 22. How much increase? 4. It means increasing hai, but diminishing rate. After that 22, then again at 4 units of apple, it remains constant, 22 again. It means it become maximum or constant. After that total utility is 20, it means it is falling. And after that total utility is 16, it is also falling. So total utility in the beginning increases at diminishing rate. At that time, MU will fall. Total utility difference is in the beginning total utility is 10, so marginal utility will also remain 10. After that 10 and 18, what is the difference in between of this? 8. So next marginal utility will be 8. 18 and 22, what is the difference in this? 4. So MU will be 4. 22 difference is 0, MU will be 0. And 22, 20, it means the difference is minus 2. And 20 to 16 difference is minus 4. So here it is clear from this utility schedule that total utility is increasing at a diminishing rate. At that time, mu diminishes. 1084 is diminishing rate. Next is when total utility is maximum or higher, then mu will be 0. When total utility start falling, mu becomes negative. So Tu is increasing, after that maximum, then falling. Mu is falling, then 0, then negative. So this is the relationship between utility, total utility and marginal utility. Now next is graphical representation. We can graphically represent this relationship of total utility and marginal utility. Now here, total utility curve start from the origin. This curve start from the origin because if we are not consuming any commodity, then our total utility will be 0. As well as we consume the number of units of a commodity, our satisfaction will increase in the beginning. After that, here this TU curve start from the origin, and TU in beginning stage TU increases. After that, TU become maximum. Here TU is maximum, or it is a peak level point. After that, TU start falling. And you know that mu is always estimated or calculated on the basis of total utility, because mu is the difference of total utility tun minus 1, or it depends upon change in total utility and the change in total number of units. So mu, when tu increases at diminishing rate, mu diminishes. That's why mu curve always slopes downward or negatively sloped. When Tu increases at diminishing rate, mu diminishes. After that, when Tu is maximum, mu will be 0. When Tu start falling, mu will becomes negative. So this is the relationship which we can graphically represent it. When Tu is rising, mu will be greater than 0. When Tu is maximum, mu will be 0. When Tu is falling, mu will be less than 0. Now next is law of diminishing marginal utility. This is the most important law because in cardinal approach is based on this law of diminishing marginal utility, and this law is applicable only in case of a single commodity. If we assume that consumer is consuming only a single commodity continuously for the longer time period, then the satisfaction which we derive from that commodity will always diminishes. Here, utility analysis, a subset of consumer demand theory, it provides insight into an understanding of market demand and forms a cornerstone of modern microeconomics. In particular, this analysis investigates consumer behavior, especially market purchases. It's based on satisfaction of wants and needs. That is called utility. And it is generated from the consumption of a good. And you know that in this diagram, here marginal utility curve is always downward sloping curve. Marginal utility can be 0, can be negative, and its slope is always negative or downward. Because marginal utility always diminishes according to the increase in total utility. If total utility increases at a diminishing rate, mu start falling, then when Tu is maximum, mu will be 0. When Tu start falling, mu will be negative. So marginal utility is always diminishes. That's why cardinal utility approach is based on law of diminishing marginal utility. Now next is explanation of this law of diminishing marginal utility. We can explain the law with the help of a table. In a table, a consumer goes on increasing X commodity. The additional unit derived from the additional X commodity always declining or diminishing. The law is clear that as well as we increase the number of units of a single commodity continuously without taking any break or without taking any time lag, then the satisfaction which we derive from that commodity start falling. So marginal utility in the beginning is falling, and after that marginal utility can be zero, and at last marginal utility will become negative. So the law of diminishing marginal utility can also be presented with the help of diagram. You know that marginal utility curve is always downward sloping, and it's a negatively sloped curve which intersect x-axis and touches to x-axis also. For example, if we consume chapati, if a person is very hungry, then he will eat number one chapati, that will give him maximum satisfaction. Second chapati will give him some less satisfaction. After that, third number of chapati will give him less satisfaction. As well as number of chapatis unit increases, his satisfaction will start falling. So, in the beginning, his satisfaction will fall. After that, when he will be fully satisfied and when his hunger is fully satiety or reached at the full satisfaction level, then marginal utility will become zero. And after that, if beyond full satiety, if he will not stop the consumption of chapatis, then it will give him negative impact or negative, his satisfaction will become negative. So this is the law of diminishing marginal utility, which is based on a consumption of single commodity. But here are some assumptions that consumption of any particular commodity must be continuously and must be in a proper unit. Like if we are eating chapati, then we must have to eat only chapatis, not any other type of food like burger, pizza, dosa, sambar, etc. No. If we are taking only single commodity, then continuously consume only that particular commodity in a proper unit, not in a single bite. So then satisfaction which he is getting from the consumption of that commodity, if he take continuously consumption of that commodity, his satisfaction will definitely fall. That is called law of diminishing marginal utility, and this law is a universal law, and it is applicable in whole the world, not only in Indian economy or not in any other type of economy. It is applicable universally. Next is derivation of, and law of diminishing marginal utility is also known as first law of Gaussian, Gaussen, first law of Gaussian, because generally this law is propounded by Dr. Marshall, but this law is also explained by Gaussian. That's why it is also known as first law of Gaussian, which is applicable only in case of single commodity. Now, what is the derivation of demand curve? How we can derive demand curve with the help of law of diminishing marginal utility? This concept is very important because law of diminishing marginal utility. In case of theory of demand, we have studied about what are the causes behind the downward sloping demand curve. Why demand curve slopes downward? So, law of diminishing marginal utility is the main cause of downward sloping demand curve. So, Dr. Alfred Marshall derived the demand curve with the help of law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility states that as the consumer purchases more and more units of a commodity, he gets less and less satisfaction or utility from the consumption of that commodity. At the same time, as the consumer purchases more and more units of one commodity, then lesser and lesser satisfaction or amount of money is left with him to buy other goods and services. So here is the diagrammatic presentation of derivation of demand curve with the help of diminishing marginal utility. We know that marginal utility curve is always downward sloping curve, and it's a negatively sloped curve from left to right, and mu can touches to x-axis. When mu is 0, then it touches to x-axis. When mu is negative, and it go beyond that x-axis. So this marginal utility curve is always downward, and mu can be 0, can be negative. Here on x-axis we have written units or quantity, and on y-axis marginal utility. As well as number of unit increases, the satisfaction start falling. At Q3 units, higher units if we are consuming, satisfaction will be less, mu3. At Q2 units, satisfaction will be mu2. And at Q1 unit, when less unit we are consuming, satisfaction will be higher, mu1. Now we can derive demand curve with the help of this curve. So we will draw another curve and take these points in another curve like mu3, p3 at lower price. You know that demand curve always shows inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. At higher price, demand will be lower, and at lower price, demand will be higher. So at lower price P3, demand is higher. When price is P2, demand is Q2. When price is higher P1, then demand will be lower at Q1. If we join all these points like J, K, L, then we will get demand curve. So we can derive demand curve with the help of this diminishing marginal utility. Now next is law of equi-marginal utility. What is the meaning of this equi-marginal utility? The law of equi-marginal utility is applicable in case of two commodities or several commodities. We know that law of diminishing marginal utility is based on single commodity, but law of equi means equal. So law of equi-marginal utility is based on two commodities or more than two commodities or several commodities. The law of equi-marginal utility explains as to how a consumer distributes his limited income among various commodities. For example, if commodity is X, Y, and Z, then how consumer can distribute his limited money income among various commodities. He will spend his income in such a way that the last rupee spent on the commodity equals Z commodity upon price of Z commodity. So consumer will be at equilibrium position where the satisfaction of each and every commodity like X, Y, and Z and the ratio of price must be equal. Therefore, this law is known as law of equi-marginal utility. In order to get maximum satisfaction out of his limited money income, the consumer carefully weighs the satisfaction obtained from 1 rupee that he spends. If he thinks that a rupee spent on one commodity has greater utility than the spending it on other commodity, he will go on spend his money on the former till the satisfaction derived from the last rupee spent in the two cases equal. So law of equi-marginal utility is also known as second law of Gaussian. And this law is based on several commodities, not on a particular single commodity. That's why this law is known as equi-marginal utility. In this law, or according to this law, consumer always spend his money income in such a way so that he will get maximum satisfaction from the consumption of several commodities. Here, demand curve can also be derived with the help of law of equi-marginal utility. For example, we assume that marginal utility of money remains constant. So MUM is representing marginal utility of money, which remains constant according to the assumption of cardinal utility analysis. And here the satisfaction which we derive from the consumption of first or X commodity like MUX upon PX. This is MUX upon PX1, MUX upon PX2, MUX upon PX3. These are three different utility curves. or we can explain this curve with the help of another names like MUX, MUY, MUZ. And here, these 3 points, we get equilibrium points E1, E2, and E3. And if we join these 3 points in another curve, then we can draw these lines that in second diagram, we have written price on y-axis and quantity on x-axis. We know that price and demand are inversely related with each other. At higher price, demand will be lower. At lower price, demand will be higher. And at lower price, demand will be higher. So demand curve generally slopes always downward, and we can derive this demand curve with the help of law of diminishing marginal utility and law of equi-marginal utility. Now, next is criticism of cardinal utility analysis. Here, there are some criticism or critically examine this utility analysis approach, which is introduced or propounded by Dr. Marshall, that utility is a subjective concept. Utility is subjective, and cardinal measurement of utility is not possible. Marshall assumed that utility can be measured in terms of money or in accurate numbers. We can quantify utility, but in generally, we can't measure it in terms of money, because whenever we buy any commodity, we can't calculate the satisfaction what we will derive from the consumption of that commodity in our notebook, and we can't estimate it in accurate numbers. Third is every commodity is not an independent commodity, because complementary goods are those common goods which are always used together. We can't say that goods are always independent and each and every commodity will give you independent level of satisfaction, because some goods are dependent on each other. So every commodity is not an independent commodity. Next is marginal utility of money. Marshall assumed that it remains always constant, but we know that marginal utility of money does not remains constant, because money value always varies according to the change in money supply. Next is marginal utility can't be estimated in all conditions. And next is no division of price effect into income effect and substitution effect. Here, cardinal utility analysis has not divided price effect into two parts. Utility analysis break down in an underdeveloped planned economy. It is not applicable in underdeveloped or planned economies. And consumer is regarded as a computer. It is not accurate, because consumer can't estimate satisfaction level in accurate numbers. So these are the criticism of cardinal utility analysis. But we know that this utility analysis, which is presented by Marshall, try to explain how utility can be defined and how we can measure it in terms of accurate numbers or in accurate utils. Next is diamond water paradox. This is also based on utility analysis theory. The apparently conflicting and perplexing observation that water, which is very useful than diamond, has a lower price than diamond. This paradox was proposed by economist Adam Smith in the 17th and 18th century as a means to understand the role of utility plays in the demand price of a good by differentiating between total utility and marginal utility. This was the puzzle of Adam Smith, which was given by Adam Smith in 17th and 18th century, that why water is so cheap and diamond is so costly. Why is diamond so much more expensive than water? Why? What is the reason behind this? Explain with the help of utility analysis. We know that water is plentiful, marginal utility is quite low. Marginal water is very useful. According to its usefulness, its total utility is very higher. But we know that price always fixed to see the marginal utility. and marginal utility is based on availability of that commodity. We know that water is available, around 70% area is covered with water. So water is abundant. That's why marginal utility of water is low. That's why its price is also remains low. The law of diminishing marginal utility works its magic on water, driving marginal utility levels at to almost zero sometimes. However, since diamond is very rare or very less plentiful or very scarce, and marginal utility of diamond is very higher, that's why the price of diamond is also remain higher. Relative price is not governed by the total usefulness of water or diamond, but by the usefulness of each additional unit of these two. In this context, one can easily see that each additional liter of water adds lesser value to the life of people because it is already available in abundant quantity or in surplus, so that its marginal utility remains low. Opposed to this, diamonds are so scarce that owning an extra gem does not impede its usefulness as a valuable possession. That's why water is cheap and diamond is so costly. Next is, what is consumer surplus? This consumer surplus is also introduced by Dr. Marshall. And what is consumer surplus? And this is also related with consumer behavior. You know that consumer surplus obtained by a person's from a commodity as the difference between the satisfaction which he derived from it and which he forgoes in order to procure that commodity. In other words, we can say that consumer surplus generally occur at that time when consumer is willing to pay more but actually he pay less. This is the difference between the amount which consumer is willing to pay and the amount the consumer actually pay. So this is the difference between consumer. This is the difference. The amount he actually pay and the amount he willing to pay is called consumer surplus. And consumer surplus can be explained with the help of this diagram. Here, downward sloping is demand curve and upward sloping is supply curve, where both curve intersect each other. Equilibrium point is determined. At this equilibrium point, equilibrium price is OP1 and equilibrium quantity is OQ1. Here, the above portion is known as consumer surplus. Here, consumer is willing to pay this much price, but actually he is paying this equilibrium price. The whole area, which is shaded by this pink color, that is called consumer surplus, and below the equilibrium point area is known as producer surplus. So consumer surplus denotes the difference between the maximum price consumers are ready to spend on a product and the amount which they actually pay for the product. So maximum price consumer is ready to pay minus actual market price which he actually pay. uh, the difference of these two concepts is equals to consumer surplus. But consumer surplus always occurs at that time when consumer is willing to pay more, but actually he pay less. For example, if consumer is willing to pay 10 rupees price, but actually the price of that product is 4, then how much consumer surplus will get? 6. If consumer is willing to pay 8 rupees, but the actual price is 4, how much consumer surplus will occur? 4. When consumer is willing to pay 6 rupee price and the actual price is 4, then how much consumer surplus? He will get 2 rupees. And when he is willing to pay 4 and actual price is also 4, then consumer surplus will be 0. So consumer surplus generally arise at that time when consumer is willing to pay more but actually he pay less. Now next is, uh, now the we have discussed about cardinal utility analysis and all the concepts which is related with cardinal utility approach introduced by Dr. Marshall. Now here we are discussing about applications of demand and supply. You know that demand and supply both play very important role in the determination of equilibrium price. At present, each and everything price is determined by the forces of demand and supply curve. Demand curve is always downward sloping curve and supply curve is always upward sloping curve. Where both curve intersect each other, equilibrium price is determined. At this equilibrium point, here price is OP and quantity is OQ. But if we take above the price, then price will higher. If price will be higher, then supply will be higher, but demand will be lower, according to the law of demand and supply. At higher price, producer will produce more, but at higher price, consumer will demand less. And at lower price, consumer demand will be higher, but supply will be lower. So at higher price, excess supply will excess supply situation will occur, and at lower price, excess demand situation will occur, because at lower price demand will be more and supply will be less. So this situation is known as shortage in supply and excess in demand. And at higher price, excess in supply and shortage in demand situation will occur. Now next is government policies that alter the private market outcome. Government can control this equilibrium price, and government can bound the price level. Government can seal the price, or government can establish price floor. This price ceiling and price floor are the two important concepts which is made by government after interfering in the market. Price ceiling is a legal maximum limit of the price of a goods or commodities or services, and its example is rent control. And price floor is a legal minimum limit of the price of any commodity or services. Its example is minimum wage legislation. And both the price ceiling and price floor are fixed by government. Price floor and ceiling. Floor price is least price that a seller would get for the product and price. And price ceiling is the maximum price beyond which a seller can't sell. So price ceiling example is that in major big cities, since the demand for rented building is increased, so is its price. So is the authority comes up with rent control laws and set a price ceiling which remains always below the equilibrium point, will be able to afford the apartment and survive in main cities. And price flooring examples are minimum wage and minimum support price, which is fixed by the government for in case of agricultural products. In a case of agriculture sector, is the best example for price floor. So price ceiling and price floor, what is the difference between this? Price floor is a minimum price set by the government or agency. It remains always above the equilibrium point. And price ceiling is the maximum limit of the price which is set by the government, and it remains always below the equilibrium price. Price floor creates a surplus and price ceiling creates a shortage. Now we can show price ceiling and price floor with the help of this diagram. Here price floor is always remains above this equilibrium price, and price ceiling remains always below the equilibrium price. Both the prices are fixed by government. Now we can conclude from today's session that we have discussed about cardinal utility analysis and applications of demand and supply. Cardinal utility gives a value of utility to different options. Ordinal utility just give ranks in terms of preferences. Cardinal utility is the idea that economic welfare can be directly observable and be given a value. For example, people may be able to express the utility that consumption gives for certain goods. So, cardinal utility is the approach of utility analysis theory, which is introduced by Marshall. According to this approach, utility can be measurable in accurate numbers, and we can explain this utility concept in different aspects like total utility and marginal utility, and we assume some things, some assumptions for the successful of this cardinal utility approach. And applications of demand and supply is based on price ceiling and price floor, and this is very useful in case of determination of equilibrium price. So in today's session we have discussed about cardinal utility approach and the applications of demand and supply, in which price ceiling and price floor is most important thing. Now, in next session, we will discuss about ordinal utility approach or indifference curve theory analysis. Thank you.